And it's been really interesting because, yeah, as I said, most churches have just been kind of doing the broadcast model, just taking their Sunday services and putting it online. And instead of actually seeing the online space as being a place where fundamentally community happens, where people want to engage and they want to have back and forth and they want there to be some form of, relationship. And something that we've been trying to do is really show churches that, like, listen, you can really reach people literally who live next door to your church without even having to go and knock on the front door, just by taking, a short piece of short format content and running a little Facebook ad and introducing them to Jesus instead of just running ads to invite people to church. We can kind of be the church in God and reach people.
Hey friends, welcome to the Word Made Digital podcast on YouTube. I'm the host, Joanna LaFleur, and this is season 8 of the podcast. Thanks for joining, for catching these episodes. We're leaning into hope and positivity for the future because it's been a rough couple of years. So enjoy this episode of the podcast. And hey, if you want to check out 7 seasons of archives of the podcast, as well as tutorials, practical help for you in church communications, creative, websites, social media, we got it all here on the YouTube channel. So subscribe now and enjoy this episode. Nick Parker, welcome to the Word Made Digital podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Hello from Cape Town, South Africa. Beautiful Cape Town, South Africa. You are in Toronto. Oh, there we go. Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad to have you because the reason I'm having you is because I heard we got a chance to talk, a month or two ago. We were introduced through our South African friend, Steve Mulder, who lives in Canada and works in, doing awesome ministry stuff himself. And you're doing digital ministry in the sort of a global context, but particularly in an African context. And so I'm like, I gotta hear what this guy is up to and what this ministry is. But before we go there, please, can you introduce yourself a little bit? Like, give us a bit of context for who you are.
I'd love that. I'd love that. So as you said, Nick Parker, born and raised in South Africa. Actually born in Johannesburg, grew up in Cape Town though. One sister, been married since 2013. I have a son, Caden. And I work for a ministry called Christian Vision, more commonly known as CV, and the African Partnerships Manager. So Sub-Saharan African Partnerships Manager. Been here since 2013, working in ministry. And as you said, what we do is primarily in the online digital space. Again, not just across the African continent, but globally.
Right.
And keen to share a little bit more and chat. And
So, okay, you got it. Let's just start. What is CV Global? I don't know if people, I'm going to link in the show notes. People got to go to cvglobal.co and check this out. But if they haven't heard of it, I had never heard of you guys until we were introduced. And so I feel like that's really a shame because it's a pretty massive thing that you're up to. And so, what is it? Let's start there. I want to know where it started. You told me the story of your funding. That's a really fascinating thing. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I think one of the funniest things is we often refer to CV as like, the biggest kept secret. And I think a big part of that is because, like, as you said, of our funding model. So CV has been around since 1988. We were founded by Lord Bob Edmiston. Lord, as in he was a lord in the House of Lords in the UK. And Bob was an extremely successful businessman in the kind of motor vehicle industry and then subsequently in property. But he'd always had a heart for the gospel. In fact, growing up, he'd wanted to be a missionary in Africa. He'd spent some time in Africa himself. In 1988, he invested a large sum of his own personal wealth and put it down as an endowment and to fund the ministry. And so we often say he's not just our founder, he's also our funder. So he single-handedly funds the ministry. Yeah, it's an amazing story. It really is an amazing story. And and what it really does is it frees us up then to not have to do fundraising. So we're a registered charity, registered in the UK in Birmingham. But we don't have to do fundraising. So our salaries are paid every single month. And I think the idea was really like, hey, you don't have to worry about. I think when it comes to ministry and missions, often your time is divided between two things, and that's your actual ministry work and then fundraising. So he's basically said, listen, don't worry about the funding thing, just focus on the
Wow.
ministry.
That's so
So yeah, we've
true.
been
I
around
mean,
since
so many people who I think
yeah.
of who are so gifted in ministry, but when you have to spend a lot of time fundraising, that may not be your skill set at all. And so it can be the
Yeah.
thing that ends
Yeah,
up
and it's
having
so
you leave
hard.
the work because you can't fund the work. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, completely. So we often joke, in the ministry, it's kind of like both a blessing and a curse, because sometimes I think, as blessed as you are to have this, funding and your salary is kind of guaranteed, you're also like, okay, well, now we have to show results and actually do the work. So there's obviously an emphasis on, kind of, being focused and being missional. Yeah, but I mean, so CV's been around since '88, and primarily when the ministry was started, we focused on kind of small missional projects, so working alongside other ministries in uh, in running missions projects on the ground. We also worked with a couple of orphanages and Bible schools, and then subsequently actually moved into. So Bob often talks about, he was supporting missionaries, and he has this story about how he was very inspired by Reinhard Bonnke. Reinhard Bonnke often talking about a million people for Jesus. And Bob, often talks, he's a numbers guy, and that's his background. And he's kind of said to God, like, well, what's my thing? And the Lord said 1 billion, and he was like, 1 billion, like 1 billion people, that's
Wow.
insane. And he said he looked at how to do that, and being able to achieve that with funding missionaries on the ground would have cost a lot of money. So he decided to move in this direction of mass media evangelism. So for a long time, CV actually worked primarily as a radio station. So we had, I think at one stage, we had the largest shortwave radio footprint in the world. So we had these shortwave radio stations all around the world that we were broadcasting kind of Christian
And would this have
content.
been,
So
sorry to interrupt, the shortwave
yeah,
radio, would this have been
no, go for it.
into like places that like I'm thinking of like maybe a Muslim country, or was it into places that didn't have
That's
access
a
to Christian
really
content?
interesting, good question. Well, I think primarily it's a hard one. And I'll explain why now. So I think the idea was to try and get Christian content as far and wide as it could possibly go. So, for example, in Chile, we took over the shortwave station of the previous dictator, and had like the largest footprint within Latin America. So we were broadcasting content in Spanish across Latin America, and then from Germany across East and West Europe, and then in Darwin in Australia, we were broadcasting up into kind of like the Asia Pacific region. So I think the idea was to kind of go as far and wide as we possibly could. It wasn't necessarily specific, like only in this country. But as kind of shortwave started getting phased out, we started moving into a very FM focus. But then the problem with FM is, as you would know, you need to have a frequency. So there's kind of government involvement then. So if we were wanting to work in a country that maybe, for example, was a predominantly Muslim backed country that maybe followed Sharia law, to ask them for a frequency to broadcast Christian content, it wouldn't be very easy. And then at the same time, also just maintaining radio stations and running radio on a global scale is expensive business,
And I assume that
And
includes,
so
I'm
that's
not a
actually,
radio expert, but you would have to maintain the towers, I imagine, too.
yeah, it's so funny. I was chatting to one of the guys in our team recently, and he was saying, like even little things that you wouldn't think about, like the cost of electricity, to run a radio station, and your staff, the kind of number of people you need for a radio station is also really high. You need production people, you need actual presenters, post-production, pre-production, technical team. So I think in terms of what we were doing, as kind of technology was advancing and, more people were switching from shortwave to FM, and as digital was really starting to kind of ramp up. But, I'd say about 10 years ago, the decision was really made to like, okay, well, we're going to start slowly moving away from radio and be primarily focused on the digital side of things, leveraging social platforms to tell people about Jesus. And again, the reason for that was primarily because radio is expensive, and like to get a
Right.
frequency is
Yeah.
really tough. So I mean, if you had to grab in 2022, if you had to grab a CV staff member at one of our offices and say, like, what do you do? Like, the most people would say we do digital evangelism. So we look at how we can leverage technology and social platforms to introduce people to Jesus.
Digital evangelism, in some ways, it's become like, in my world, it's become a big question. People are always talking to me about, how do we do digital evangelism? How do we reach people on the
Yeah.
internet? Again, like with CV, what are some of the maybe the big buckets of what's happening with that?
Mm.
Is it chat rooms or videos, or and then I want to maybe get into some of the campaigns or some of the
Yeah.
stuff you
Yeah. I'd
found
love
that
to.
works.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, definitely. So I think when we talk about a campaign, generally what we're speaking about is short format video content on a social channel that we've then used really specific targeted marketing behind to get it in front of as many non-Christians as possible. So, anything between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. We've also looked at stuff like SEO optimization as well. So if people are typing, what is the meaning of life, or, then our ads would pop up. But we used to do that in quite a ambiguous way for quite a long time. I think we would just take English content and blast it across. Specifically in Africa, we'd blast it across the continent. We'd have really good engagement. There'd be lots of likes and views and all that kind of cool stuff. But what we really found is that ultimately it wasn't necessarily as missional. So, our mission is to introduce people to Jesus and encourage them to become his true followers. That's literally our mission statement, and what we were finding is that a lot of the content the engagement we were getting was actually from Christians, and we'd call it like a Christian high five. People would just be like, hey man, this is
Oh,
amazing.
right.
So in terms of being missional, we weren't quite hitting the target on that. So about 2 years ago, our board of directors and trustees got together and really outlined this new 5-year plan that we're now all working towards, which kind of really focuses on 3 objectives. So the first of those objectives is evangelism primarily to unreached people groups. The second one is look at how we can help Christians to share their faith in the online space, so basically mobilization. And then the third one is looking at how we can resource the local church with our free digital resources and knowledge to say, like, hey, as a local church, this is how you could also be doing digital evangelism. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting is that although we've seen this switch through COVID mostly to kind of like a hybrid church, kind of like a digital adoption, what we haven't seen is like the adoption of digital evangelism. It's kind
Right.
of churches have just taken what they've done on a Sunday and just try to
Yeah.
replicate
It's
that. So
as you
just
said,
it's become more
yeah, it's the
broadcast.
classic. My experience is it's a lot of the preaching to the choir, like quite literally, you're
Yeah,
reaching people who
yeah.
already agree with you.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting because, yeah, as I said, most churches have just been kind of doing the broadcast model, just taking their Sunday services and putting it online, and instead of actually seeing the online space as being a place where fundamentally community happens, where people want to engage and they want to have back and forth and they want there to be some form of relationship. And something that we've been trying to do is really show churches that, like, listen, you can really reach people literally who live next door to your church without even having to go and knock on the front door, just by taking, a short piece of short format content and running a little Facebook ad and introducing them to Jesus instead of just running ads to invite people to church. We can kind of be the church in God and reach people. So it's been an interesting 2 years. But yeah, just coming back again. So where we are as a ministry right now is kind of with those 3 objectives, looking at, again, how do we reach unreached people groups specifically? How can we help Christians share their faith online? And then, how can we help the local church to just get better at, using social media for evangelism specifically, not for like brand building or like church
Yeah,
growth.
yeah, that's it. Well, and I'm curious about when you're talking about targeting or making that shift to target, or trying to more accurately target, because you were always trying to target, but how to more accurately,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that have
Mm.
been those shifts? I think people would love to hear, like, for example, I've heard the thing here about a church that would be like, if you're running like if you have a group for people struggling with marriage issues, then like you would want targeted ads on, if people are looking for a divorce lawyer, then you would want your
Mm.
ads for your marriage support group tagged to what people are actually searching for
And so I'm curious,
Yeah.
what is sort of some of
Yeah.
the, if you have any examples of what it looks like?
Yeah, I would say our most successful campaign that we've run, specifically in this region, is actually called Middle of the Night. I mean, original name. But all we did was we literally ran a video from 12 at night till 3 in the morning. And it's literally just someone speaking to camera and saying, hey, I don't know why you're up right now. I don't know what's happening in your life, but I just want you to know that Jesus loves you and he wants to have a relationship with you. And we would love to tell you more about him. And that's been our best piece. And I think what
Wow,
that
it's
highlights
so
again is
simple.
that there's a couple of things there. Well, that's it. It's at it. And it's just about being genuine. Someone just talking to camera and saying, hey, I don't know why you're up right now, but I just want you to know that no matter what, you are loved. And if you want, we'd love to chat to you. So I think sometimes we overthink it. I think you touched on something that I think sometimes can be a little bit of a gray area. I think sometimes we try and focus too much on felt needs. It does come a little bit of we're leveraging someone's despair sometimes. We don't want to ever go hey,
Like a
go
manipulation,
and
maybe.
get the depressed people, because it's an easy win.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I genuinely think it's a slippery slope sometimes. I mean, some people might not agree with me on that one. So I think the biggest thing for us is just communicating. The metric that we use internally is an introduction to Jesus. Like, how many people have we introduced to Jesus? So the idea is really just communicating an aspect of who Jesus is. We're trying to put the gospel out there and get Jesus in front of as many people, and then engage with them around questions they might have, negative or positive, and take those individuals on a journey. I think we also understand that when you're doing digital evangelism, you're just a link in the chain. You might meet someone on the beginning of their journey towards their the end of their journey being closer to salvation. So yeah, we're just trying to create engagement and create conversation with people. One caveat I do want to just add is when we're talking about unreached people group, I think something that's changed a lot for us there is really looking at, studying, being very data driven. So looking at an unreached people group. An example would be, in the north of Nigeria, you've got the Hausa people, which is a mostly Muslim background, believing, completely different way of life compared to the south of the country. Looking at okay, they speak Hausa, what's their culture like? What are their perceptions of Jesus?
Right.
And then working with local partners to produce content that would speak to them. And then also working with churches on the ground so that as individuals engage with these campaigns that we're running, that we actually have local churches and missionaries who could then disciple them and walk a journey with them. Because I think that's another aspect to it. I think it's very easy to run a campaign online and get really good numbers. You can put it in a presentation and everyone would clap hands, 1 million people saw this video. But we're also looking at how do you turn those views into conversations and then actual real world change. So yeah, my one bit of advice is don't always get caught up in the numbers, specifically on reach and video views, because those are not necessarily indications of genuine
No,
transformation.
I love that.
So.
Well, I think, yeah, it's true. Somebody who's thinking about getting into, thinking about, I want to post more on social. I want to tell, I feel convicted to do evangelism on the internet, but my video only got 100 views. And so it can feel like you deflate.
Yeah.
But that's a great encouragement that you're talking about. You don't know who
And
those 100
I
people
think
were. It's less about, did you have many views you got?
exactly. And the thing is, I think there's also a difference between how we generally use social media, and being intentional around evangelism. And I think that's one of the things where the local churches also kind of found itself a little bit in between. It's as a church, we're just so used to communication strategies and come to church on Sunday, don't forget life group on Thursday. It's very broadcast, very informational, very brand awareness. It's not necessarily taking a piece of content and then running targeted campaigns across your Facebook page in your community, saying and just telling them about Jesus. I think there's still a disconnect there. And again, as I said, as a ministry, part of what we do isn't just doing the evangelism side. We also want to help churches to do it. So if there's anyone listening to this and they're wanting to know more about digital evangelism or how they could do it, we would absolutely love to help. And as we mentioned in the beginning, CV's in a very fortunate position in that we are a funded ministry. So everything we do is 100% free. there's never going to be there's no agenda with us. We're never going to send you a bill at the end of
Wow.
the day to ask you, ask for a donation. We genuinely just want to reach people with the gospel and help the local church.
Wow.
So
So you're talking mainly to Canadian American audience. There are people from other, but we're broadly an English speaking podcast, so English speaking countries.
Yeah.
And so there's been in our context, and maybe in yours as well, but in our context, fresh in our minds, is there's just a lot of disappointments, scandals. There's been this, this word deconstruction has been very popular. Maybe that's the same where you are, but one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you today, I'm just back from my first time in the continent of Africa myself, Kenya and Tanzania.
Amazing.
And one of the things that trip did for me was remind me how God is working all around the world. And the church, like, even when I feel so discouraged by this mess of the church stuff, also, like, Christians are doing amazing work. People are meeting Jesus. Lives are being changed. People are finding hope. So, Nick, I would love for you to can you encourage us today? I know that not everything is perfect. I'm not trying to do that. But I think one of the things my hope was in our conversation was if you could just, do you have a couple stories or illustrations you give of, like, whether
definitely.
like some digital, or maybe you have individuals that you use, tell us a story about particular people who've been impacted by what you guys are doing, or churches that you're working with that you've seen really get it. I am saying it as broad as possible, but I would love for you to encourage us.
Awesome.
Like, what's going on in your continent that would just really remind us that, God's still doing good stuff all over the world.
Completely. I think I think you're right. I think there is a little bit of kind of like a Western view of Christianity, and there's a lot that's happening in the West at the moment, and I think in some ways it kind of does bleed through to what we're doing in the continent. But I think on the opposite side of that, the gospel is active. The Lord is doing work across the continent. In Kenya, where you've just come from, a lot of churches will have once a month, like all night worship evenings or all night prayer evenings. There's phenomenal moves of the Spirit. I mean, I was out in Kinshasa in the Congo, like not too long ago, and going to a place where, a local church where they don't have walls, it's just a roof. But guys are in there praying, and they're praying for their community, and they're running food programs, and they're running sport programs, and they're giving extra lessons to kids. And I think it's kind of like the great reminder of kind of like Acts 1, like the church just being the church. And you see that across the continent, specifically in a continent with such high unemployment and poverty, and a continent that's still riddled with corruption. I think in many cases, the church has really, at a very local level, has really kind of stepped up and is being the church, is making a difference. And it's extremely refreshing. I think sometimes, even in Cape Town, if you've been to Cape Town, you'd know that we're very more kind of like West focused. We're way more European. But when you travel to, places like, I was just in South Sudan again, just to speaking to guys that have come out of war, who have lost family members to the war there, but they're still just filled with joy, and they just love Jesus, and they want people to know Jesus. And it's extremely encouraging. But on the digital side as well, I think there's also this misconception, like Africa's the dark continent, when in fact, we have some of the fastest mobile connections. Data prices are dropping all the time. If you look at the data, there's more mobile phones, more smartphones in Africa than there are people. Digital money is massive here as well. So there is a massive adoption in terms of digital and online. And what you're finding is, there's even these amazing tech hubs that are coming out, in Kenya and Ethiopia, amazing tech hubs of like innovation and AI and a bunch of cool stuff. But even the church adopting it. I mean, we work with a church called Nairobi Chapel in Kenya. And so one thing I forgot to mention is that what we do, and I know there's other organizations that do this as well, but as I said to you, we don't just want to kind of put the message of, run a campaign and leave it out there. Our objective is to connect people back to local churches. So we actually have a platform called CV Outreach, where the whole idea is that as someone engages with a piece of content that we're running, if they respond, whether that's through a Facebook message or a WhatsApp message or an email, we automatically route that response to the closest church partner to that individual. And what we're seeing, in Kenya, we have this partner, Nairobi Chapel, who every month they're getting like 100, 200 messages from people in their community saying, I want to know Jesus. I want to know more. How can I get plugged in? And so we get like a monthly report from them. In fact, I looked at one today, and of about 100 messages, like 25 of them were genuine people like, I want to give my life to Jesus. So I think it really does prove that the idea of digital evangelism, this ethereal thing. When we're not talking to like some like weird androids online. You're talking to real people who have real problems, who really want to know more about Jesus, So the a lot's happening in the continent, and it's amazing. It's truly amazing, from a local level all the way to kind of like a national governmental level.
Well, and it's interesting as I'm reflecting on it, you're talking about there's some of the challenges is many languages, many cultures
Wow,
and
yeah.
views, and yet you're able to kind of consider and target what are maybe the language, like the certain language or cultural groups, with what's going to actually connect with them.
Yeah. It's really not easy. In fact, I mean, like I was saying, like we've in this office, a large portion of our time goes to like just looking at data and reading up, but also just working with local partners. Saying like, we have the digital know-how, we can run campaigns, but we don't know. We don't speak Somali or Hausa. So we have rely on partners on the ground to help us with that. But I think that's what also makes this continent so beautiful. You have this phenomenally diverse group of traditions and cultures and beliefs and languages, and it's about working with those individuals, to try and make a difference. But yeah, it is tough. It is like, for instance, one of the languages we're working in is called Fulfulde, which is spoken by the Fulani people, which is a nomadic people in kind of the west of the continent, and kind of in different regions they all speak different dialects. So we're working on like, okay, well, we're going to run a campaign in Fulfulde that's like focusing on Nigeria and has to be in this dialect. But then if we want to run it in like, other areas, it has to be in a different dialect. So there's a lot of challenges.
And then the cost
but at the same time,
right? I'm hearing not just the challenge, but the logistical cost of specializing in that way. It's amazing the kind of funding model you have to make that possible, because so many wouldn't have it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's not just like a logistical issue. It's also like just a people issue, finding Christians in those countries that are willing to do translation. I mean, I could tell you tons of funny stories where we like had to use a translation service, and then we find out that we're actually asking a Muslim to like translate something for us into another language. And it's like telling people about Jesus. And, so there's tons of that. There's tons of learning. But I would also say, like, for us as a ministry, I think we're humble enough to also just say, people can throw around the term experts or whatever. We're always learning. We're always figuring things out, and there's always new ways to do stuff. So, that's just part of the process. Especially when you're working with people groups. Example for Fulde as a language, there isn't even necessarily like an agreed upon, written online version. So even radio stations who broadcast in the language will dabble in different dialects because there isn't almost like a formalized, a version. So it makes life interesting, but at the same time, it's extremely rewarding.
Really practically, it sounds like a lot of this is talking about like ad campaigns, but what are some of the platforms that you're targeting? Like maybe you're on everything everywhere, but are you is it YouTube or Facebook? Or I'd love to talk about WhatsApp too, because in North America, WhatsApp is not used as much. And I think people will in the future use it more. And so I'd love to learn. Maybe that's a separate question, but I'd love to talk about WhatsApp. But what are the platforms that you're doing these outreaches on?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think the knee-jerk reaction would be to say we use everything. I think what we do is we look at the landscape of platforms available, and then we also look at where the highest user numbers are. So an example would be specifically across the African continent, Facebook is still by far the biggest platform. And there's a couple of contributing factors to that. Like number one, there's a version of like Facebook or, Facebook Lite where it doesn't use as much data. So if you're in a country where data is expensive, you would use that. And then there's a couple of countries as well where they've zero rated Facebook. So, after a certain time of the day, Facebook's free. So it just becomes, the go-to platform. So way bigger than like an Instagram or a Twitter or a TikTok, although I would imagine that TikTok's growing as well. So for us here in Cape Town, working up into sub-Saharan Africa, the primary focus would be Facebook right now. Also looking at optimizing YouTube as well. But again, in like other parts of the world and other offices, they would be looking at different platforms and optimizing for those platforms as well. So square video, 16:9 video, we try it all. One thing I will also say, which you might find quite interesting, is that in Africa as well, for some people, Facebook is the internet. So we would talk about, hey, just Google something, or like, hey, I'm just going to go and visit the website of this and that. What we found is that in a lot of places, like people actually use Facebook for search. Like the search bar on Facebook is their search bar. Yeah. So it is the internet to a lot of people. It's the ecosystem that they know. So yeah, we still find it the best in terms of reach, and because we're running campaigns in countries where there isn't a lot of kind of like digital activity in the marketing and advertising space, our cost is quite low. If you want to talk cost per click or whatever terminology you want to use. So for us, it's not actually that expensive to run campaigns. I think another thing to mention is we also try and do this at scale. So I mentioned earlier, one of our KPIs is an introduction to Jesus. Now, what that is it just means that someone's watched one of our videos to about 95% of the video. And the idea is that by that point, we would have introduced, an aspect of who Jesus is. We would have communicated who Jesus is. So as a ministry, currently our target is to do 1 million ITJs or introductions to Jesus a day.
A million a day. That's amazing.
People. Yeah. Through just optimization of campaigns, and again, that's in unreached people groups. So that's not we're not talking, running big campaigns across South Africa or Kenya. We're talking about like Somalia, North Nigeria, Mali, Chad, those types of places. But then also, big parts of Indonesia and Philippines and stuff as well. And then obviously the Middle East is also a bit crazy. So just to kind of give you an idea of like we work at scale as well. And I think that's one of the things that the online space does allow for, is it allows you to really scale up your work. So we'll do a lot of testing, a lot of optimization, and then we'll scale that up. But again, that's just looking on the evangelism side of what we do, not kind of on the resourcing. But yeah, Facebook is it. And as you said, WhatsApp, massive. If you don't have WhatsApp, you're dead in the water. The only problem with WhatsApp is WhatsApp doesn't have an open API, so we can't necessarily run campaigns through WhatsApp. But what we do is try and leverage WhatsApp for kind of like an online-offline conversation. So when people do respond to our campaigns, they can respond with a WhatsApp message and connect to either a missionary or a church within their community over WhatsApp. So that's kind of how we've integrated WhatsApp at the moment. But we are looking at some cool stuff.
So you're talking about
around WhatsApp.
Like WhatsApp is like the follow-up. Like you want to know more, you want to talk to us, go to WhatsApp.
Yeah. And then instead of it coming to us, like as a ministry, because, we're still, at the end of the day, we're not a local church in the sense of like church, we are, as in like the big C church, but but we believe in the power of the local church. So we're always looking to connect individuals back to either missionaries or local churches. So what we've seen is that the best way to do that is, kind of like one-to-one through a WhatsApp conversation. So we run the campaigns, we create, the environment for someone to be able to engage and respond, but that response then is automatically routed through WhatsApp to a local church partner to then kind of continue the conversation. So really just trying to make it a little bit easier for people to, yeah, to connect and chat and be connected and followed up with.
Yeah.
But there is some cool stuff. I mean, like we're looking at now. Um, you know, one of the biggest issues we have is we're working in mostly countries that are Muslim background believers. So it's getting a Bible to them is quite hard. But using WhatsApp to send an audio Bible or a file that they can listen to is a great way of kind of like bridging that divide. So that's some of the things we're looking at the moment. Is if someone responds, being able to send them like Matthew
Like a
1 as an
PDF or
audio,
something.
like a
Yeah.
yeah, and then they can listen to it because a lot of the countries we're working in as well, there's high levels of illiteracy, and it's a oral culture, oral traditions.
Oh,
So
right.
being able to send an audio book, an audio, be able to send the whole book of Matthew, chapter by
In
chapter
their
audio that someone can
language.
just listen to. Yeah, and they could save the number as like anything they wanted to, and they could delete the message afterwards. So we're looking at around security as well. So there's cool ways to kind of embrace it and work around it as well. But yeah, we're always keen to try new things. Like I think that's one of the things about CV. We on a very kind of like bread and butter basic level, we're doing these digital campaigns every single day. But then we full on have like an AI lab in India, and we're looking at machine learning and augmented reality and all that kind of stuff as well. So we're trying to
Wow.
kind of like keep on top of all emerging and latest technologies, but at the same time, just realizing that ultimately people just need to hear the good news. And the best way to do that is to communicate with them in an environment where they're already gathering. So, whether that's TikTok or Facebook or whatever that is, make sure we're there.
So I love this. I love this conversation. You're speaking my language. If we're, people listening, they want to say, okay, I want to be better equipped in this. It sounds like
Mm,
your group of people can help me. I don't know anything about AI,
yeah,
but you can help me figure out how to do something better with my Facebook or Instagram or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Do you have is there a resource or a page on your website they should go to start? Maybe I'm putting you on the spot, so maybe you don't know what it is off the top of your
No,
head,
no,
but
no, no.
where
I
can
love
they
it. I love it.
start
I love
if
it.
they're coming to we'll link it in the show notes.
Cool. Well, I mean, first place to go would be cvglobal.co, not .com, just .co. We're trying to be fancy. And then what we've started to do recently is we have a platform called CV Resources, which is available on the website. Where what we've done is we've taken our full library of like the last 10 years of all the content we've produced in multiple languages, and we've made it available for free online. So ministries can literally go and download any of our content for free and use it on their own social channels. So we're kind of saying to churches, you don't have to produce your own content. We've already got this massive content
Right.
library. And then we've also launched CV Training, which is kind of the training arm of what we're trying to do, where we're putting together, courses where individuals can go through, or churches or life groups could go through, and it's like, how to do social media marketing, how to, make a video with your cell
Yeah.
phone for evangelism. But on a kind of more practical note, I would say the best thing to do would be you can either get hold of me or get hold of one of our regional teams. I think we have about 35 or 38 offices around the world working in all the major regions. And a big part of what we want to do, as I said, is we're doing the evangelism, but we want to help you to be able to do the evangelism as well. We want to help empower and uplift the local church as well. So, yeah, we have free resources available. They're out there. We also have an app called Yes He Is. That's also just a bit of an online community of
Sorry, can you say that
where we
again?
just
What's the
encourage
app called?
Christians.
Yes.
It's called Yes
Yes,
He
he
Is.
is. It's sorry. It was I missed
Yeah,
that. Yes,
yeah.
he is.
That's all good. Yeah, it kind of started off as an app, but it's turned into a bit of an online community now of Christians just, encouraging each other to share their faith. And it's where we're really driving kind of this mobilization strategy specifically around young adults or teens, youth and young adults, and looking at how we can equip and empower them to share their faith in the online space. But yeah, it's all available on our global site. And then, yeah, anyone can contact me. It's just Nick Parker at cvglobal.co.
Amazing. Oh, well, Nick, maybe just can you give people listening like a final encouragement, as you live and breathe this every day, thinking about digital evangelism, and other people, this isn't their full thing. Can you give a, an exhortation or an encouragement to people? Go do it.
Well, Yeah, I think the biggest encouragement we have right now is that we have the opportunity to reach people with the good news like never before. Like we can literally, someone could be sitting at home on the couch, and they could see a piece of content that not just CV's running, you're running as a ministry, or you, Joe. Like, they could see that and come into genuine relationship with Jesus. I think if we look back at the greats, the Billy Grahams, the Reinhard Bonnke's, the greats of, when you think about evangelism crusades, I think, if you had to tell them now, the opportunity that we have available, they would run towards it. So I'd really just like to encourage
Yeah.
everyone, like the social media is, it's an extension of who we are. We're all gathering there. We're all using it. We use Google to answer some of life's most difficult questions. But at the same time, it's equally just an amazing opportunity for us to reach and engage people. And there's genuine change happening. Lives are being changed. There's amazing responses. And and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. So
Yeah, maybe that's the best part. We can do it and start
yeah,
for
well,
free.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Nick, thank you so much. I hope everyone feels like pumped, encouraged, challenged by the conversation today. And I have a feeling everyone's going to want to go and check out the website and find some of these resources.
Awesome.
Thanks, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Absolutely. It's honestly a pleasure. And as I said, if anyone has questions or questions, queries, wants to know more about what we're doing, please reach out. As I said, we're here to serve you, to serve the local church, and to make Jesus known. So thank you.